Thank you all for being here again this morning. And if there are some new people today, we appreciate your attendance. This is day 2 of ProLink Tech Live, and I'm Bree Kruder, Executive Vice President for ProLink. I oversee our customer success program as part of my role at ProLink Solutions. So working with clients on their priorities is something I do all year long. And I'm just pleased to be here today to offer this training, which is part of the offering that we do in our user group program is offer intermittent training throughout the year. This conference being something that resulted in 2020 and going forward as a virtual option in addition to our in-person conference that we host in the spring. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here today and train some of our users that we would not otherwise have the opportunity to train directly. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's sessions and had the chance to interact with some of our ProLinkers and fellow attendees. The session that you've joined this morning is our LIHTC compliance training, and our trainer for the session is Sarah Supernaut, the customer success rep and trainer for ProLink. Sarah addresses client submitted tickets and questions, working with our product team for resolutions. She also provides clients with the latest enhancements and updates on all ProLink products. Sarah's done a number of trainings directly with our clients, both large and small. And she has been with ProLink for many, many years. So we're glad to have her with us today to cover this complex topic. And with that, I think I'm ready to hand this off to Sarah to begin her training. So Sarah, you can go ahead and take over the screen share and I'll stop sharing.
Okie dokie. Let me make sure that I can do this. Replace current share. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, we have this up and you can see my screen. Welcome to day 2 of ProLink Tech Live. I'm Sarah. I've probably worked with many of you before, and we'll continue working with you in the future. Today, we're going to do a little deep dive on the LIHTC program in our compliance module. We're not going to really talk about home. We're not going to talk about additional set-asides. I want to focus on some of the ins and outs and granularity of setting up the LIHTC program and evaluating our compliance reviews along with some exceptions, which is everybody's favorite, I know. This way we can kind of go over things you may have seen and not utilized before, some fields that you might be able to utilize for your agency for your reporting every year. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about setting up the LIHTC program. And so we're going to start with a poll question because I know that everybody comes to our ProLink Tech Live with different levels of experience. So our question here is, how many asset managers at your agency would you consider proficient with ProLink HFA compliance evaluations and reviews for LIHTC? 1 through 5, 6 through 10, or all of your asset managers are on top of it. So we'll take about, 10 seconds, Sam, to reply to the poll.
I would give them about 20 more seconds.
Okay, I'll give you 20 more seconds then. That's really good. That's all of them is a great answer. And I see 1 through 5, and I'm hoping that means that that's only how many asset managers you have at your agency. You have a small amount. Excellent. So hopefully this will just reinforce what we already know and learn maybe a couple of new tricks. And ooh, all right. So oh, we got 34, 68, 14, and 18. That's awesome. Okay, good. Again, hopefully we're going to teach you something you didn't know or a little extra tips and tricks to make your lives easier. So most of you who work in asset management already know that by the time you get your hands on a project or a property, your other people in your agency have taken care of everything and they have onboarded the property and you already have a lot of setup. But one of the things that you want to make sure as part of like your asset management checklist or before you set up your program is just kind of do some internal housekeeping and make sure all this stuff is already done in your environment. So one of the first things you want to do, especially when it comes to LIHTC, is to make sure that you have your MTSP limits from HUD uploaded for as soon as they're effective. Most of you usually do that. I know we do that in our test environment to make sure we have the most recent income and rent limits before we go in and start adding tenant events and evaluating our compliance reviews. The second thing you want to do is make sure you have your utility allowances set up if utility allowances are something your agency does track. Property or they are set up on the building. Sure those are ready to go is going to help you avoid any utility allowance exceptions when we get there. Make sure you have your bins with the correct set-aside data. If you have a multi-building project, you'd want to make sure that would be set up. If you want to click like the 8B checkbox on your bin in case it's going to be part of a multi-building project, we'll talk about that a little bit. Make sure your buildings are created and they are associated to the correct bin and you do have a place and service date populated. You also want to make sure you have your county defined. As we know, when you, if you're using the portfolio property data update to update your property with all the building and bin data, the one thing it will not copy over is the county, or if you're using town name, it won't copy that over either. So you need to make sure that your property building data has that on it. And if you have a lot of buildings and the idea of going in and updating each one by one just doesn't excite you, you can have a Smart Docs for that. You can use Smart Docs to update all the counties and all the place and service dates if you want to. If you're not aware of how that works, please reach out to me and I can provide you a very simple but effective Smart Docs template to take care of that data for you. You also want to make sure all your units are created and active and associated to the correct building. Usually when you create a unit via the application is going to automatically set that to active. But if you do use a Smart Docs template, whether I provided it for you or that you have it yourself, you need to make sure on that Smart Docs template that you have set that unit to active. And usually that appears as true or false. I know that when we default open that template, it's going to say false. So any unit that you're going to add to the system during that, you need to make sure the is active box is true. You need to make sure you have your compliance reviews created for the reporting year. This particular example has a lot of compliance reviews created, but we're going to be in and out of a lot of different properties today, so don't get married to any of the names that you see. Most of this data is from our test production environment, just to give you an idea of the look. And then make sure once you have your compliance created at that point, any owner agents that have access to your work center where the tenant portal access is, make sure they have the correct access granted to that work center so they can get in and start adding their events so you can do your evaluations for the year. So when we talk about editing the compliance program, depending on your agency, I'm not sure where this information, who would put this information in. But as you know, you can only add one program once for each property. So in this example, I've already added the LIHTC program. This is an existing property. But when you go in, you'll have the compliance program name, the start date, the end date, the issuing authority if it's federal or state, and these other areas. I just want to point this out really quick because it's on here. When we talk about the orange bar on fields, that is going to be used for HUD LIHTC data collection, which is a completely separate discussion and training point. So when you're on these and you see these little orange ribbons or things on the field, that's what that's for. But the first box I want to talk about right now, when you set up your edit compliance program, you may or may not allow a pre-program review. And this is in the event that you're already leasing up and you're already moving in tenants, but the compliance program hasn't started yet. Like, for example, let's say this compliance program that we're looking at actually has a compliance start date of 1/1/2025, but you've already started leasing up that property and you can pull in tenant events. So if you do that, you want to click Allow Pre-Program Review, because that's going to allow you to bring in tenant events where the event dates are prior to that compliance start date. So you can just start evaluating before it's actually active. So if you have any questions about pre-program review, please let us know. And the other caveat to that is making sure that you have the projected place and service date on the building populated. So them is my favorite and everybody's favorite, the recertification requirement, because once we get to the exceptions, I feel like the recertification requirements are usually the exceptions that drive everybody batty. If I learned nothing a couple of weeks ago, was it last week or week before? Setting that is really going to dictate whether or not you have a lot of research areas to get through. I know this is dependent on the partnership agreements that you have. We have several we have several values for the research requirement, anniversary date, anniversary with a grace period, 120 days before the anniversary date are not required, only required on first anniversary. But then we have my personal favorite, my 5-star recertification requirement, which is within the compliance period. Now, I don't know, again, every agency's policy is different, but once you have it within the compliance period, that just means for any unit that is occupied by a low-income tenant, as long as they have a research somewhere between that compliance review period, it's going to meet that recertification requirement. Otherwise, you have to keep up, your owner agents need to keep up with, dates, when the move-in dates, and they have to do time and space math, as I call it. We got to go all Doctor Who on trying to figure out what these are. So when possible, if you can do within compliance period, do it. Otherwise, if you have to populate your compliance program, the different certification requirement, that's a specific date, and you have issues trying to figure out what that is and how to test for that, again, reach out to me directly or via ticket and let us know. We can talk about a little more about what those recertification requirements look like in practice. Then we have the elderly designation, which I haven't seen a lot of agencies use, and maybe I'm incorrect in that assumption, and I just don't spend enough time looking at your actual data. But once you have the elderly designation selected, and the only option in this dropdown right now is 100%. What that's going to do, and this is really good for, senior centers and homes that are dedicated to seniors. When you have that selected, what that's going to do is going to go through all those events and make sure that all the head of households, or at least one household member, is going to be at least 55 years old. Also, I'm looking at that elderly designation and thinking about my age, and it's making me twitch a little bit because I don't think I'm going to be elderly in a few years, but whatever. So that's what the elderly designation is going to do for you. In case that's something you want to track, you're going to get a special exception saying that, hey, you have this household does not have someone who is 55 and up. Resyndication and resyndication start date. So this is in the events where you are resyndicating a current property that has tenant events. If you check one, you have to have a resyndication start date. And if you have an existing compliance review, it can't fall within the review period. So let's say that you have, let's see, a compliance review where the compliance end date is June 1st, 2024. So what you would do, and your resyndication start date is going to be June 2nd, 2024. You would have a compliance review that, and not a program, but a review that was from 1/1/2024 to 6/1/2024. And then you would add an additional compliance review that's going to cover the 6/2/2024 to 12/31/2024, because that's going to be kind of the first period, half period for your resyndication. That's kind of how that would look. And also you need to make sure that you have the resyndication place and service date field populated on the buildings that are being resyndicated. There might be some outlier edge cases about, hey, what happens when we come in with a new building that hasn't been reported on before? If we need to work out the kinks and kind of find a good process for that, reach out to us. We will meet with you. We can talk about going through that and what that might look like. So your multi-building project setup. Most of you know that in order to transfer tenants between buildings, the BEN must be part of a multi-building project. And this is kind of a reminder. I'm going to kind of bring up my application now and find something that I have a multi-building project on here. So this particular property has 7 bins on it, and we're just going to make one multi-building project out of it. So you can see that this one has seven buildings participating. And the big thing on this is to make sure that when you're on your bins, that you actually have that 8B box selected, because that is the one thing that's going to have to be selected. We have made an update to the list bin screen that show whether or not that multi-building project 8B box is checked, which is great if you have a lot that you have to go through and you can't remember when you saved and returned and what you updated. So this is a box that we're talking about that has to be selected in order to be available on our multi-building project screen. And I know that, some projects, like if you have a scattered site, you might have some buildings in one, some buildings in another. You can have, if you have 100 bins on your property and you want to divvy that up into like 10 separate multi-building projects, you can. But the rule is that you can only have one bin in one project at a time. You can't, and I don't know why you would. In case you tried to do that, you can't do that. It's one bin per multi-building project, but you can do several multi-building projects on a property. This is what we talked about. The bin must have the 8B box selected in order to add the bin to the multi-building project. And again, the update to the list screen shows us that now. If by chance you have a average income multi-building project, when you select that and you go through and do some evaluate, when you select that, sorry, it's going to show the average income information that the expected average of your average income unit designations and your average income qualified group of unit designations. And it tells you down here when you're like, where do these numbers come from, Sarah? These values are based on the current AIT unit designation entered, and they could change once compliance evaluations are completed. So unless you have uploaded or designated any AIT information on your units, that's going to show 0%. But once you have designated that, it's going to kind of show you the average that's been populated in the system. So that's what the average income information will show you. Now, if you need to change the set aside on the bin and it's part of a multi-building project, and when we say MBP, I do mean multi-building project, you need to remove the bin from it before making that update, and then you have to add the bin back to the MBP. So like right now, if I want to go in here and make any edits on the bin, let me bring my screen back over here. I can't do this because it's part of multi-building project. So we're talking about, what is this, 01. So if I go over here to the multi-building project, and I'm going to take this particular bin out of there. Here in just a second. Take that one out. Now I'm wondering if it's going to yell at me if there's a finalized compliance review, because it might, and I forgot. This will remind me. But it let me. So at that point, when I go back over to the bin, at that point, I can change the minimum set aside if I need to. And this is me clicking around and making sure. So now, for whatever reason they need to change that on a bin, I can do that. So that's what this particular section of the slide is talking about. All right, so now let's go and talk about LIHTC compliance reviews. The assumption is now, by this point, your compliance program has been set up and you have your compliance reviews created for the year, and you have started taking in tenant events from your owner agents, whether it's via the tenant portal. So main tab, there's a lot going on in here. And while we're talking about this, I want to point out a couple of things. Exception history is going to be there for you to show the history of the exceptions as you run this. And then your tenant events and log. These are fields that we use for testing and isolating issues when we have bugs. And it's kind of a for ProLink only thing, but sometimes I know you folks like to have that turn on because you like to look at the tenant events list. So that's something that we can turn on for you, but if you reach out to us, but it does slow down things. It slows down your compliance evaluations and your rendering time because it's pulling in much more data to the screen than it should. But it is there, like if you want to test something in UAT and you want to kind of take a look at things, turning it on in UAT is not so bad because you're not actually doing your active data in there. And you're going to see some of these other tabs on my example here, the COVID stuff. Those are user-defined fields. And just kind of a reminder, if you all haven't noticed or you haven't taken advantage of that, we made some updates to our user-defined field functionality to where you can have a separate tab name. So instead of just having custom fields and having a bunch of things on there in the categories that we used to have. Now we have specific tabs that you can customize the name for. So when you see these, they're not in your system because you didn't create those user-defined fields, and that is okay. So your compliance start and end dates have to be within the compliance program start and end dates from the edit compliance program record, right? And if it's not, you're going to get an error when you try to create that compliance review. So the compliance program status, which you're going to see after you evaluate, is going to be passed or failed. That's going to depend on all the programs passing or failing. So in this example, I have LIHTC and additional set-asides on this screen, and both of those programs need to pass to update the calculated field based on past. If any of them failed, they all fail, right? So that is something you can't edit. That's something the system generates and populates in that field. So compliance overall status reason and your overall status and overall results of risk. So the overall results of risk and the compliance overall status reason, these are pick lists that you can customize if you have some kind of process or different verbiage you want to use for keeping track of your compliance reviews and different data points that you might want to collect. And the way you do that, I'm confident that most of the people that we're talking to here, I'm going to make this a little bigger so everybody can see it. Where you would do that is you would go into your admin panel or someone that you know that you work with is going to have access to the pick list functionality. And this may be news to some of you who haven't seen this before, but we have a lot of pick lists in the system. Some of them can be customized, some of them can't. If it's not a system pick list or a system value, you can add values to it. A system pick list or a system pick list value basically means there is logic tied to it and we can't change it because the system looks for a specific thing. So if I type in overall just to find this, I can find my overall results over here. And this is compliance overall status and overall results. And we have overall status reason. So which one was I talking about? Compliance overall status reason. So in our test environment, we have a few that we defined. But again, and I can think of one agency in particular that we've talked about this, where you can add different values in here. Like, okay, I know all this stuff passed and, all the units are fine. However, we have issues with other things that this particular property is not doing in a timely manner. You might be able to add a value in there for you to track that. So all you'd have to do is have someone who's an admin add a pick list value, talk about that internally, and see what you want to do. Compliance overall status reason. This one, compliance overall status. Apologies, because apparently I mixed these two up here. I'm noticing my color scheme is way off. Compliance overall status cannot be changed. This is the system pick list that cannot be edited. So that's either going to be pass or failed. You have to pick one. You manually set that, which is a little different. Again, compliance overall status, you might want to fail it because they didn't enter their financials or they failed their desk audit, something of that nature. So the tenant event submission status, this is going to be impending until the owner agent submit tenant events via the tenant portal, or you change it to submitted for whatever reason. They can't be added. You can't have events added or updated on a compliance review for the reporting year if you have the tenant event submission status set to submitted. I know that many owner agents, as you're going through compliance season and you have your owner agents submit stuff, and they come back and you have to tell them, we need to change this, or you have something you need to update because this is incorrect, or we got an exception where you accidentally put in way too much rent, then you might want to set this back to pending for them. At that point, they can go in and update that information. And I also want to talk about the difference between the compliance review status and your tenant event submission status. So when you look up here in our header, it'll say compliance review status. In this example, it's finalized, but there are different values or different levels of statuses that we have for our compliance reviews. And so tenant event submission status is completely separate from compliant review status. There are completely different values. Even though I know sometimes we talk about tenant event submission status, some people think we're talking about the compliance review status. We are not. That is not what we were talking about. So let me pop down in this compliance review and kind of give you a visual of what I'm talking about while I have a sip of water. So you're going to see over here where it says compliance review status, right? Pending, in process, and finalized. So real quick, let me have some water. Hang on. Finalized means you finalized it, right? In process means you have events and you have at least evaluated once, because when it's pending, it means you have events you haven't evaluated yet, so it doesn't know which programs it's processed, and it's not going to know that until you actually do the evaluation. So the pending means you might have tenant events, but you haven't evaluated anything yet. And process means you have evaluated. That is a completely separate status from your tenant event submission status, because that's going to be pending or submitted. So just in your mind, every now and then, I know things get crazy during compliance season. Just remember the difference between those two areas. And again, the tenant event submission status, if you've got a compliance review and it's the end of the year, at some point that's going to have to be set to submitted, because when you do, or whoever in your agency is going to do your HUD reporting, if the tenant events aren't submitted, it's going to be one of the missing requirements or missing information when they report on a property. The value of the number of original 8823 sent to owner field, that gets populated from the corresponding compliance audit record based where the fiscal year of the audit matches the compliance review. Compliance review year. So if those exist and you've populated that field on your compliance audit, that's going to show up here on your compliance review. It's a manual field that you enter. It's not going to magically know how many 8823s that you have. All right, so actually getting in and evaluating the compliance review. At this point, we are assuming your owner agents have submitted their tenant events. You have evaluated. There are some missing requirements that are for your eyes only, basically. These are ones that the tenant can't really do anything about. These are things internally that you have to take care of. And missing requirements will show up. It's going to show up in the main tab of your compliance review when you evaluate. And it's going to be things like jurisdiction field. That means you don't have a county defined on your building. And same thing with no corresponding income limits for this event. We've had some tickets every now and then when we have to go back there and see how far back we need to go with those. But, you know, if that error comes up and you are 110% sure that you have that data in there, let us know and we'll dig into it and find out what's going on. You're going to have a place and service date for the building. For everybody who uses lock deep rent skew or deep rent skew, which I think I'm just talking to one agency right now, these are just things that are saying, hey, if you have a income requirement for a deep rent skew program, you have to click that lock deep rent skew fixed units. And same thing, if you have an income requirement, but you don't have any units that have been designated for deep rent skew, you have to do that as well. So these are telling you basically your internal missing requirements, that there's stuff you have to do that has nothing to do with the owner agent, right? The new one that for this year is the building associated to LIHTC unit does not have a re-syndication place and service date. And then it tells you what it is. So a lot of times I think we look at these, we're like, I have no idea what that means, because you're mad that you got a missing requirement, or you're kind of like, oh no, I'm on a deadline. I can't deal with this right now. Just kind of think it through, look at it, look at the help text. And again, worst case, you can let us know, because here's an example on one of these that we have a missing requirement. Well, I didn't validate this, which is why this is information that I added manually, which is a good segue into what we're going to talk about next. This is not something you should see. When your owner agents are putting in their data and they're validating their data to enter it, you shouldn't see one of these. And let's pop in there and see what that looks like. Now we're talking about the missing requirements resolved in the tenant portal by the owner agent. So this one, the one that we just showed over here really quick, the household income is required. That means they don't have a household income value in there. That should have been validated in the system. So that's one of those in the green that the owner agent takes care of, right? And they know this, and I know they've seen it in our tenant portal training, and sometimes you tell them, but this is kind of a list of all the things that they could see when they validate if they have that data missing. And these are the ones that are kind of what I would call their problem and not your problem. But all the ones in green should be taken care of before it ever gets to you once they have submitted their tenant events. And I think that's why the tenant portal is kind of awesome, and why we make sure they validate everything before they submit it, because not getting all these what I would piddly errors with things missing here and there does kind of put the onus on the owner agents to make sure their data is complete and correct by the time it gets to you, because that's less time you have to spend on letting them know it needs to be fixed, because the tenant portal is going to filter out, catch all this stuff, and make sure that they update all this before you even get in there and evaluate. Missing requirements should be resolved prior to head export. Anybody who does your head export at your agency, if you've been in the position where you still have a compliance review from the collection year for HUD that hasn't been resolved or finalized or still has missing requirements, you're going to hear from the person at your agency who does the HUD export. I am certain. Okay, I'm just kind of checking our clock here to make sure that we're doing really good on time, and I'm not talking too fast or too slow. All right, so now we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty of the LIHTC tab. And let's see where we at. When I'm talking about the LIHTC tab, we can ignore the fact that this one, the one I'm going to show right here, this is what I mean. You have your LIHTC income limits tab, which if you use NIMLs, this is where you would do that. And I think we're all familiar with the 45-day rule, because it lets you know. It says right there what the 45-day rule is for. If you don't know, we can talk about it later. But this is the grid that everybody sees, and I am not convinced everybody understands exactly where these values are coming from. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about this. I have a property up here that's got, I think, just one bin on it. And then I have one down here that has a multi-building project. And you can tell it's a multi-building project because it says project right here. Up here, it's just blank. And that's going to tell you it's based on the bin. So let's first talk about the applicable fraction status. This is going to be passed or failed based on the number of low-income units, right? And when we talk about what is a valid low-income unit, it is occupied, it is active, it is suitable for occupancy, and the tenant event is a unit type of low income. And so that's how these get pulled into the calculation. It also talks about the lesser of the square foot fraction or the unit fraction is greater than or equal to the applicable fraction entered on your bin. So the applicable fraction on your bin is where this information becomes very relevant. So in this situation that we have up here, the applicable fraction you have on your bin is that. And this is telling me both of these are not anywhere near what it needs to be. Down here, this looks great, except for this one. And so again, both of these are the same, but it is going to look at the lesser. And it's going to take both of those into consideration, unless I believe we have a config setting for using square footage primarily. Then they may calculate differently, and your concerns may be different on that one. So the applicable fraction is defined on the bin. When you type in the applicable fraction, that's basically saying, even, I want 100% of these units to be low income. The unit fraction is going to be the percentage of active low income units without compliance exceptions. So in this case, on this particular compliance review, there's a lot of exceptions, especially on this bin. And square foot fraction is going to be the percentage of active low income unit square footage without compliance exceptions. And as you resolve the exceptions, if you get exceptions, and you recalculate the applicable fraction and set aside, these numbers should go up once all those are resolved. And this is kind of our baseline starting point with these particular properties. This is very much bad, because we don't want everything to fail. We want everything to stay in compliance. That is our goal. So when we talk about the set asides, again, pass fail based on your set aside. So in this scenario, I believe we have set aside defined on the bin as 40% of the low income units must be at 60% AMI or low for the county on the building. And so it's going to look at that. The set aside is completely separate from the applicable fraction stuff. And so this just means, hey, this failed the set aside requirement. You do not have 40% of your units at 60%. You have much less than that. You have 35%. Then we talk about the minimum set aside. That comes directly from the bin. So just to kind of to recap, the minimum set aside comes from the bin. The applicable fraction comes from the bin. Unless you've changed it on the multi-building project, then it would come from there. The goal set aside. And there's one person in particular that I hope is watching this because she knows what I'm talking about. This is going to take priority over the defined and minimum set aside on the bin or multi-building project if populated. So yeah, it's like you have 40%, but you know what? If you make that 100%, because yeah, I know that we only have a 40-60 requirement, but I want all of these to show up as low income. We need to make sure everything is low income. If you had 100 over here, it's going to pass or fail based on the goal set aside instead of the minimum. And that is the difference between those two. The calculated set aside is going to be the percentage of active low income units without compliance exceptions that meet that set aside, right? And so in this scenario, it passed because, yeah, it's only 40-60 and we don't have any goal set asides. But, the applicable fraction, we might have some issues with that we need to investigate. So let's go into that. The calculate applicable fraction set aside button right here. When the exceptions are overridden and the record is saved, and we're kind of going to look what that looks like, go through what that looks like. This is going to recalculate once you've overridden the exceptions, okay? Because what it will do is if you have a unit that is ruining your applicable fraction or set aside because it's not meeting a requirement and your owner agent has a really good reason for it. I'm thinking of available unit, vacant unit issues where they have done their due diligence to try to rent it to a low income, but had to move in somebody, a market unit, make it a market unit instead. If they have done their due diligence and they can attest to that, you can override that. And once you've overridden those and saved it, you can hit this calculate applicable fraction SA button, and that's going to recalculate these values on exceptions for units that have been overridden and add those back into the calculation to bring those values up. Usually, once you've done your due diligence and cleared these exceptions and verified the data, that horrible applicable fraction has not been met exception is going to go away if your calculations change as expected, right? So in this, I have decided to overwrite all of these and hit save, and I just put my test reason for doing that up there. And now it's passed because I hit the calculate applicable fraction SA button, and it's put all of those units back into contention and made them valid, and everybody is happy. Now the calculated AIT imputed income, I just put the calculation on the screen. This is also in our help text. This is only going to be populated if your federal minimum set aside for your bin or your project is average income. And so that is kind of what the calculated AIT imputed income value represents to you. So again, it's similar to the calculation, but not the same, and it is specific to average income. So if I override these items here, and you can see these are AMI because it has, or I'm sorry, it says average income right here. Then once I override those and I recalculate, this is going to go to the correct one, and it's going to be right at 60, which is what we want. So the calculate AFSA button will update that as well. Data has been modified. Basically, I think everybody here knows, and if you don't, this is your reminder. You come to your compliance review and you see that little yellow message, you need to evaluate that again. That means any data that may have affected your tenant events or your program data or your review data has been updated somewhere in the system. So you should reevaluate that. And that way you can get the most recent information for your compliance review to be able to continue and go on to do your recertification. So now in our last 15 minutes, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite LIHTC compliance exceptions. And I'm probably going to breeze through these just a little bit, but I wanted to address them with you and kind of go through what they might mean. So applicable fraction has not been met. Project failed to meet minimum federal set aside requirements. So I have a example over here. So these are what we talked about. Like a lot of times this means you have units that have exceptions that cause it to not meet the federal set aside requirement and also not meet your applicable fraction. So when I go down here into 2020, I don't think there's going to be a lot I can do here because I don't have that many tenant events over here, but let's take a gander. Right now, this is fail because of all of these, and I don't have that many here, and I don't need to evaluate it again. But if I override these and then recalculate, I feel like that's not going to let me. I think I may have led you down a rabbit hole. Yeah, that's not going to change anything because these two are still going to be a problem. This had taken care of one of these in the 445002. So this one had passed, but since it's a multi-building project, everything failed. And that's because the other reason you would get an applicable fraction has not been met or failed to meet the minimum set aside. If you have 50 units on a property and you only had uploaded like tenant events for 20 units, that's also going to cause it because then you have a bunch of units that are vacant and they're not going to feed into the applicable fraction or set aside. So that is another reason you would get that. So if you can't override the exceptions, that means you have incomplete data and you might want to reach out to your owner agent to be like, what about these other 30 units? These don't have events. Gross rent exceptions and household income exceptions. I think we're all familiar with these. One of the changes we've made recently, and I want to say in the past year or so, but it could be in the past 2 years because time is just flying by. It's going to give you the information. It's going to say, hey, this is the max income limit, right? And this is the tenant income, right? In this scenario right here, I don't know if you can see it, but it's $518,000. That's a good chance that the owner agent had messed up and put in incorrect data and, gotten happy fingers and typed in too much, which we all do from time to time. And in this situation, it's pretty simplistic. Just say, hey, did you mean to make the income this? Is this true? Because this is bad. And that gives the owner agent time to reconcile and put in the correct data. Same thing with the max rent limit. It's going to show you the max rent limit and which income and rent limits it's calculating from and what the AMI is. And it's going to show you what is in there for the tenant rent. So in this case, maybe they meant to type in $216.80. They can fix that. And that exception is going to go away when it's been updated and you reevaluate. Transfer between bins in a single building election is not allowed. This lets you know you need to set up a multi-building project or you need to do something about that transfer. Because again, you have to have the multi-building project in order to transfer between bins. And then low-income units used on a transient basis. I haven't seen a lot of folks who have A, receive this error and B, asked about it. But basically, for I think it's efficiency and higher, if the date of move in and move out is 6 months or less, it's going to be like, what are you doing with this unit? It seems like a transient unit. And if it's an SRO unit, it's 30 days. So that just means there's been a move in and move out within 6 months, which is frowned upon according to the 8823. Unit does not have a recertification event. We talked about that earlier, right? We talked about your anniversary date may have been missed, or they just haven't submitted a recertification for your event. This is where most of these come from, and it's going to tell you, which unit, and you can go in and reconcile it. In a lot of cases, it's like, wait a minute, this compliance program should have within compliance period and it has anniversary date. You can change the certification requirement on your program and get rid of a lot of your problems. And I know people who would agree with me on that. It is the magic wand. Low-income unit is occupied by non-qualified full-time students. So this just means that there's a field on here that has not been populated. And I'm going to bring that up here in just a second. Let's see if we can find it. Because we made some updates in the past year and a half that we have valid values for the LIHTC program now that are different than the home values. And I'm going over here into 2018, keeping an eye on my time. Because I think the point of this one was to show kind of how to rectify that. In case you do not know. So this comes up. Bear with me. Come here. So on this particular property, I have the data set up specifically to show these exceptions, right? I have a lot of exceptions on this one. Scroll, and I will scroll, and I will scroll. I will scroll. We have a lot of errors on there, huh? Here we go. This is the one that we're talking about. Low-income unit is occupied by non-qualified full-time students. That sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it looks. Because once you click on this exception, it's going to take us over to the offending tenant event, as I like to call it, that's causing our issues. And it's a recertification, so we're kind of like, what is this about? So we have full-time students. Both of these folks are full-time students. So this is not a valid value. So if I just click married joint return on this and go back, and if I reevaluate this compliance review, that exception is going to go away. I'm not going to do that because it's going to take too much time, and we are very short on time now. Unit B is potential violation of the vacant unit rule. Okay, so this will display if there are vacant units on the bin or the multi-building project based on your market move-ins and the comparable sizes of the units. Like in the scenario I have on the screen, we have a move out on May 4th and the next move in, it was a move out of a LIHTC unit. And then the next move in was a market, and there was something else that a low income unit. It's going to call that out. And again, with the rules that we have for your owner agents, it's if they have done their due diligence, they've done everything they can to rent out the unit to a low-income family before moving in somebody market, that can be overridden. Depending on your agency, you might want documentation to prove that they did their due diligence and made every effort possible to occupy that unit with low income before going market. This just calls that out. Talk to your owner agent, find out why did this happen. Same thing with our available unit rule, but a little different. I mean, again, this is based on the over income event for a recert. And this is going to test the rule within a building or a bin. The exception will display on every single over income unit based on the market movement too. So these are ones, again, you can talk, these are exceptions you can talk to your owner agents about. Have you done everything possible? Were you aware of this? Let's talk about it and get it reconciled, or at least get documentation to make sure that this is okay and they've done everything they were supposed to do. So we don't have to issue an 8823 because nobody wants to issue an 8823. Owner certifications, other required files should be added to the compliance file tracking tabs. So if you don't have one, you're going to get an exception. So this is what that exception looks like. Once you add the owner certification and save it, at that point, this is going to go away when you reevaluate, right? So finalizing your compliance reviews, part of that, going through and making sure that you have everything you need, that may depend on whether or not you have to issue an 8823, right? If you have to issue an 8823, that's going to be on the property building or it's going to be on your compliance audit. We're not going to talk a lot about that today because A, we don't have time, and B, we did a great webinar. And well, I did it. So I guess I'm saying I did great. Yeah, it's a good webinar on 8823s in August. It's on our YouTube. So if you want like a little more information about 8823s and how to validate those, go on out to our YouTube channel and you'll be able to watch our most current information as of August for your 8823s. So our last thing we're going to talk about is finalizing our compliance reviews. You cannot finalize a compliance review if the button's disabled and you have to meet specific requirements. If you hover over that finalize button, it's going to give you some information. Occasionally it won't. It'll just be blank, and then we have to do some deep diving. But most of the time you're going to get the correct tooltip that tells you you have to do all these things. You have to do the hokey pokey before you finalize this, right? First of all, a compliance review finalize priv, which is something you talk to your sysadmin about, but I'm guessing the people who need to finalize have that. You can't do it if you have missing requirements or you're missing your annual owner certs. The home program is effective for the compliance period and the home property type equals fixed and locked units. If you have home program on your property, that's going to cause a problem as well. I know we were talking primarily about LIHTC, but it's worth mentioning. Your tenant event submission status is equal to pending. You have to make that submitted before you go. And then you have to finalize things sequentially. If you have like your prior year that hasn't been finalized, it's not going to let you do it. But again, the tooltip's pretty helpful and it kind of lets you know the information that you need. So once you have all of those requirements met, you can click finalize, and then it's going to say put your name there and the finalize date. And in theory, you are done. So we have 3 minutes left. Let's ask our last poll question. I know we talked a little bit about AIT. So I wanted to find out how many LIHTC average income properties does your agency currently maintain? Knowing that we put our average income functionality in recently. Is it A, less than 5, B, 5 to 10, C, 10 or more? And we have about 15 seconds, Sam, if I'm not mistaken. Ooh, 10 or more, less than 5, 5 to 10. Interesting. Well, thank you for replying to that because I know that this is something that we have flagged before we put in our functionality, and now everybody's utilizing it. It's exciting and different. That's all I have. Do we have any questions? Let me pop on over to our Q&A here and see if there's anything that you need me to talk about. Sam?
Sarah, there are no outstanding questions at this time.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. I know Kelly's been manning our Q&A, so that's fantastic. That's all I have. I can stop sharing and give it over to Bree.
And the next session that we will be covering at 12:15 is going to be our Why Adoption Matters session, which will be featuring myself and Jim Paris, our sales engineer at ProLink Solutions. So we look forward to seeing you in just a few minutes for that session. With that, I think we will go ahead and break out into our coffee and bagel. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.